So Mardi Gras over. Did anyone notice that? We didn't have much of a Mardi Gras this year, did we? That's okay. It's okay. We're in the season of Lent. And in the world I grew up in, I didn't know much about the season of Lent. I grew up going to a good old Southern Baptist church, and we certainly heard a lot about sin and salvation and the crucifixion and the resurrection. And I know that in the Catholic Church you certainly would have too, and you would have had very different practices. And you would have gone and you would have been one of those that had the ashes on your forehead. And what that signifies is that they typically take the ashes that are from the prior year's Good Friday, the palm fronds that were used on the previous year's Palm Sunday, and they've been burned to ashes. Well, now we know how commercialized things are, and we know that they just send off somewhere to get those now. We're certain of that, but just very symbolic of starting the Lenten season with the mark of the cross on the forehead. And it certainly means a lot to a lot of people, because this year most places they needed to do it by driving by in their car. Just the way people have gotten their COVID shots recently instead of doing it in the sanctuary. So sometimes people will wonder, well, how is it determined, this Mardi Gras season, the season of Lent? And it's actually, a little complicated, but also very simple. And that is, Easter is determined by the vernal equinox, the spring equinox, when that takes place. And then the next full moon after the spring equinox, then the next Sunday will be Easter. And then you go backwards 40 days, and that does not include Sundays, because the Sundays were not included in those 40 days. But the 40 days have great significance in both the Hebrew and the Christian scriptures. We know that to go into the wilderness, or the Egyptians in the wilderness for 40 years. And so the 40 days had great significance. And so it does not include the Sundays. But then, of course, the Mardi Gras ends the Tuesday night before all that. Okay, so I hope you took notes, and I'm going to ask you afterwards if you remember all that. But it was an unusual Mardi Gras season, and that's just where we find ourselves in life right now. We just need to let that go and be at peace with that. One of the things I'm going to talk about today in this season of release and renewal is that I'm going to talk about just being present now. How can we release ourselves and others from the past and be present right now, not worrying about the future? And I know that's difficult, but it is possible. It is possible, unless you're Frank Bieber and he doesn't worry. If you're someone like Frank, you don't worry. And his life is magical anyway, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Lent, considered a season of renewal, but also a period of reflection and release. We all must face some sort of crucifixion along our lives, right? Don't really like that word. And a renewal of the mind. We must look at the shadow and then turn to the light without flinching from either. Can we do that? I've got a bit of an echo in the room, haven't I? No? Okay, it's me then. Okay, I'm okay with that. If you don't hear an echo, okay, good. Okay. So we use affirmations. And some of the practices that we use, affirmations and denials, what are they? Well, those are some tools we've been given by Unity, and they really do work because they can help retrain your mind. They can help you retrain your mind from thinking the worst case scenario and not to deny. When we say denials, we're not saying I deny reality. No, we're not doing that at all. We accept reality, and that's part of being at peace too, isn't it? Because we're accepting it. We're accepting that. A denial is simply saying it has this reality out there has no power over me. No power over me. And it has no power over my happiness. So we've been given the affirmations. It's one of the things that Unity teaches all along, every day, is to use affirmations. I am joyful. I am healing. I am almost finished with the most painful part of the grieving process. Anything that the mind can conceive, we can turn it a bit for the better, can't we? We can always reframe it. Yes, you might say, I have this illness, but today I'm going to accept it and do the best I can with it, because I'm not going to allow it to make me hide in a corner or to ruin my life today. I'm going to do the best I can, absolutely, because I want to be at peace, and I'm not going to let this rob me of the one true thing I have, and that's my peace of heart and mind. I have that. And I'm going to exercise control over it. So there was a story, the children's story about Grandpa's slippers. I don't know if any of you remember that. But Grandma has gone and bought him a new pair of slippers because he's been wearing these things till they're worn out. I have a pair of those, as a matter of fact. And he just keeps resisting and resisting and resisting. These old slippers are comfortable. I don't need any new ones. I like these. And I'm going to continue wearing them. And it's a sweet little children's story about the fact that the children are involved too. And the fact is that Grandma doesn't get to decide for him. And that's the truth. Someone else cannot make the change for us. But he finally decides to try those new slippers. And, oh my goodness, he loved them, and they're comfortable and they're warm. And he wonders, why in the world didn't he let go of the old ones sooner? So life is like that. We so often refuse to let go of those old slippers, don't we? And we're just, we're going to hang on for dear life. Barbara Winter said, when you come to the edge of all the light you know and are about to step off into the darkness of the unknown. Faith is knowing one or two things is going to happen right now. There will be something solid to stand on, or you will be taught to fly. And I think that's important and to remember when we find ourselves in difficult situations, and as we think of our friends and loved ones that are still without electricity right now, what we can pray for. We can pray that someone might come along with a solution for them, or just the right solution, or they will think of it for themselves. This winter storm reminded me, our daughter Jonna is in Portland, Oregon, and she was without power for several days. And so I mentioned it last week, with a little assistance from her dad, she was able to ignite her gas fireplace. It had an electric ignition, so it took her a little bit to decide to find out how she could light it. So she was able to keep warm enough, and we were so grateful we did not have to worry about her freezing in her house. But it reminded me of a time when we lived in East Tennessee, and it was a bitter winter, and Dan was out of town. He often was working on a contract, and we had a really fast snowstorm that came in, and it dumped about 1.5 feet of wet snow. And of course, we lived out by the lake in a big sprawling house, and our electric lines were down for about 4 or 5 days. And I was there by myself. I learned a lot of lessons that week. After I put my fear aside of taking care of myself, a neighbor brought some firewood, and we did have out on the area that overlooked the lake on one side of the house, sort of a glassed-in porch. We had a fire stove, or a wood stove, and so I was able, with the wood that we had around, to keep that wood stove going for all that time. Now, I don't look back and cherish the memory, I'll tell you, but I do know that I learned several lessons that week, and that was that I could take care of myself. And I did just take everything out of the freezer. I even put a packet of frozen biscuits on top of that wood stove, and don't you know they cooked? So I was able to have something warm to eat. And you learn about all the people out there in your life, too, that know you and offer to do all these wonderful things. You know, a brother that lived about an hour away said, I'll come down and stay with you and keep that stove going. And how sweet to have people that love you like that. And I said, oh, no, you stay in your own house. I'm fine. And I was. Now, like I said, I don't look back on it. I wouldn't want to experience it again. But I did learn a lot, and I learned that I could rely on my own resources, and that we can go through difficult times and we can make it to the other side. We do. Things happen. We have storms here. We may be without electricity for a while, but you can guarantee we're not going to be cold, right? Most of the storms that we have, we generally are not going to be cold. That's not going to be one of the issues we're going to deal with after we've had a storm, but we do pray for those that are in harm's way this morning. But I found an additional inspiration this week I want to share with you. It was from an unlikely source. I ran across a writing that was about a book titled Fundamentals of a Caregiver, and it sounded so interesting that I wanted to see. There was a Netflix film made about it, And we don't have Netflix, but Dan said, well, call Sherry. She does. You can go over and watch it at her house. He's always volunteering everybody. It's a good thing, though. So I went over and we watched this Fundamentals of a Caregiver. Now, I have to advise you, if you watch it on television, if you watch that, the language is really something. So be prepared if you do watch it. It was a really sweet movie, though, with a lot of touching moments. But in the story, there's a 30-something man named Ben Benjamin. He's an author who no longer writes and a father who no longer has a family. He's taken a job as a caregiver to a teenage boy named Trevor with muscular dystrophy and is confined to a wheelchair. So both Ben and Trevor share the commonality of not living in the present. Ben cannot comprehend the events of his past. The loss of his young son has paralyzed his life. And the thing that has paralyzed his life is not so much the loss of his son. That was traumatic and life-changing, and he can never get over it. But the guilt that he's carrying over the loss of his son is the thing that has shut his life down. It was an automobile accident for which he was responsible. And so he cannot put that aside. And Trevor cannot comprehend his foreboding future and the random and unfairness of it all. Muscular dystrophy. There's hardly even any treatment for that, much less a cure. So they both are in a bad place in their lives. Each of them is in a deep ditch, and neither one of them can climb their way out of it. And the statistics of Trevor's disease say his health will progressively get worse and worse, and ultimately he'll die a premature death. And Ben has been dead ever since he lost his son. The universe seemingly has orchestrated chaotic events to bring each of them into the other's lives. And ironically, more out of need than design, Ben then has taken this job. He went to caregiver training, and he even got a certificate to show for it, of which he was very proud. But it was even obvious that he couldn't take care of himself. And here he is going to take care of someone else. And Trevor, who's all but succumbed to his fate and demise, has allowed Ben to see the vast difference between merely existing and truly being alive, because Trevor's just existing. And after months of taking care of Trevor, waking him up at the same time every day, bathing him, stretching him, dressing him the same way, preparing the same meal every day, very few things that he would eat, watching the same TV shows within the same four walls each day, Ben was finally getting frustrated with Trevor. This is a young man with many gifts and talents and sharp as a tack. And he's sitting there in those four walls doing nothing. So he finally says to Trevor, "Don't you get tired of this man? Doing the same thing day out, in and day out every day? This isn't living. This is existing. Don't you want to go somewhere? Don't you want to do something?" Trevor then reveals to Ben that he has a map of roadside attractions that he had privately kept. So Ben notices that the one roadside attraction is circled with a big star next to it, and he asks him, "What's this one?" He said, "Well, that's the world's deepest pit. Have you ever heard of it?" Says, no, frankly, I haven't. He's drawn to it, to the name, because of how depressing it sounds. The world's deepest pit for the world's most depressed boy. But anyway, he couldn't conceive of going to see it because he was just going to stay within those four walls. So Ben says, wouldn't it be great to take a road trip and see it in person? So he then goes on a crusade to convince Trevor's mother that it will be okay to take this trip across the country and that he will keep her son safe. He'll do all the things he needs to do to make sure that Trevor is happy and safe and gets this road trip of a life. So he convinces her. After traveling for days across the country, they finally, after having seen several pretty weird things, one of which was the biggest bovine in the world, and that was sort of a downer when they had to haul his wheelchair up a flight of stairs in a barn to find that it's just a stuffed cow standing there staring at him with glass eyes. So they weren't too thrilled with that. Stopped a few other places that were not remarkable. They did run into a couple of really cool people that joined them on the journey, and it was just a really, it turned into just a really fun road trip. So they finally get to the world's deepest pit, and they climb the steps to the tower, look over the guardrail, down into the world's biggest pit, and a funny thing happens. They're prepared to look into the darkness of an abyss, and unexpectedly, they find magnificence in a beautiful, clear, blue pool of water. So to their surprise, the world's biggest pit is filled with aqua, clear water. And they're mesmerized by what they see. Time stands still, and their only desire at that moment is to appreciate the moment they were in, right then. And they both did something with that trip and going there and seeing that surprised, deepest pit in the world. And from what I can find out, it does exist. And if you were to Google it, you'd find it was left over from a very, very, very deep mine. And that it has now filled in with this beautiful, clear water. But they learned Ben no longer carries the burden of his past. He let it go right there, right then, and decided he needed to do something with his life. His wife had been hounding him for a divorce, and he was doing everything he could to outdistance the server, doing everything he could. They'd be knocking on the door. "I know you're in there, Ben." He'd just be quiet. So the first thing he did when he got home was he signed the papers and delivered them back to his wife so she could go on with her life too. So Trevor lets go of the fear of the future. For the first time, he's gone out and he's really done something he can remember, he can be proud of. So he decided to change. And for all the years he had left, while he could, he was going to enjoy life. So when they got home, it took a while, but Ben did strike out, and he left there, but they remained friends, and he continued to visit Trevor every week while a very kindly caregiver came in. And he went on and began to write, and began to become the writer he was always intended to be. And so their lives went on, and they both. So the lesson there, we all know that sometimes we've all been there looking out from the guardrails of our lives, haven't we? Thinking there's nothing I can do. Trevor, my life is over. Ben, I can't get over this loss and my responsibility for it. But we can. And we have this one beautiful, lovely life that we've been given. And we should not waste a precious moment of it. So whether you're sequestered in your home right now, whatever the situation is for you, and nobody's judging that, nobody, whatever your situation is, I pray that you will either have a Sabbath with your time. You'll find out what your next right step is by praying. And just put the golden key on it, the golden key that Emmett Fox taught us about. Instead of praying about your problem, put God on it. Let's put God on this. And hopefully we can release ourselves from the past during this Lenten season. Let's release ourselves from the past and whatever has hold of us so that we can move into a new and marvelous future. So today, I thank you for being here, and I thank you for your time.